let my stepmom and her kids celebrate their inheritance at my dad's funeral, then watched their faces when the réal was read. Dad died on a Tuesday. They say grief changes people. But for me, the day my father died, it wasn't grief that consumed me. It was the chilling realization that the woman he loved, the woman who had systematically dismantled our lives brick by brick, was now, with his body barely cold, planning her final, most grotesque act of betrayal. My father had been gone for 6 hours, his hospital bed still warm, when Victoria started planning the funeral. "We need to make this elegant," she announced, flipping through catering menus with a manicured hand. Raymond, she declared, would have wanted something sophisticated. It was surreal. He was still technically here, and she was already calculating which caterer would impress the right people, which flowers would photograph best for her social media tribute. Victoria had blown into our lives like a perfectly coiffed tornado when I was 15. She brought her twins, Ethan and Zoe, who were my age but acted like they owned the place from day one. Dad was so smitten by her bleached smile and yoga-toned body that he didn't see how they systematically erased every trace of my mother from our home. It wasn't a sudden hostile takeover. Victoria was too smart for that. She understood that dramatic changes would raise suspicion. So, she worked slowly, methodically, like a surgeon, removing healthy tissue one piece at a time. It started with small rearrangements. She'd move things while Dad was at work, claiming she was just organizing and making the space more functional. My mom's favorite coffee mug, a chipped ceramic piece I'd made in 3rd grade art class, disappeared from the kitchen cabinet. When I asked about it, Victoria said it must have been accidentally broken during cleaning. "These things happen," she said, with practiced sympathy. "I'm sure your mother would understand." My mom's reading chair, a comfortable overstuffed armchair where she'd spent countless evenings reading to me, got moved to the basement because it didn't match Victoria's new aesthetic. The family photos on the mantel were gradually replaced with Victoria's professional headshots and glamour shots of the twins. "We need to blend our families visually," she'd explain when I protested. "It's important for your father to see us as a unified unit." But I knew the truth. Victoria wasn't helping Dad heal or blending our families. She was methodically erasing my mother's existence to make room for herself, like painting over a masterpiece with cheap house paint. The psychological manipulation was subtle but relentless. Victoria would make comments about how unhealthy it was for Dad to cling to memories of his deceased wife, how important it was for him to move forward and embrace new possibilities. She'd frame every suggestion as being for his own good, positioning herself as the caring woman who wanted to help him heal. "Grief counselors recommend removing triggers," she'd say while boxing up Mom's belongings. "Your father needs space to build new memories without constantly being reminded of his loss." When I protested that these weren't triggers, but cherished memories, Victoria would sigh and explain that I was too young to understand the complexities of adult grief. "Your father is trying to build a new life," she'd say. "Don't you want him to be happy?" The implication was clear. If I truly loved Dad, I'd support Victoria's efforts to replace everything my mother had been to him. Victoria was also methodical in her approach to isolating Dad from his past. She suggested his old friends reminded him too much of his life with Mom, keeping him stuck in grief. She'd schedule conflicts whenever his longtime buddies wanted to get together, or plan elaborate family activities that made it impossible for him to maintain his previous social connections. "Raymond needs to focus on the future," she'd tell people who called. "He's building something beautiful with our blended family." Within a year, Dad had lost touch with most of his longtime friends. Victoria replaced them with her own social circle, divorced women, and their children who reinforced her narrative about moving on and embracing new beginnings. The financial manipulation began with small requests that seemed reasonable. Victoria needed money for the twins' school supplies, then their extracurricular activities, then their college preparation courses. Each request was framed as an investment in their shared future as a family. "Ethan has such potential," she'd say, showing Dad acceptance letters to expensive programs. With the right opportunities, he could really make something of himself. Dad, who had always valued education and hard work, was happy to support what he believed were legitimate educational expenses. What he didn't realize was that Victoria was systematically redirecting funds from my college savings into accounts she controlled. The college fund that Mom and Dad had been building since I was born suddenly became a family education fund that somehow only funded Ethan and Zoe's activities. When I questioned this, Victoria had elaborate explanations about tax benefits and education planning that made Dad's eyes glaze over. "It's much more efficient to pool resources," she'd explain. "This way, all the children benefit equally." But the benefits were never equal. Ethan got a BMW for his 16th birthday, while I got a lecture about the value of taking the bus. Zoe got a shopping spree at Nordstrom, while I was told that thrift stores built character. The twins got private tutoring and college prep courses, while I was encouraged to consider community college as a more practical option. Victoria's masterstroke was convincing Dad to refinance the house to pay for the twins' private school tuition. She presented it as a smart financial move, claiming that property values were rising and they could take advantage of low interest rates. "We're investing in the children's future," she said, showing Dad glossy brochures from elite preparatory schools. "This education will open doors for them that could change their entire lives." What Victoria didn't mention was that refinancing the house meant a significant portion of Dad's equity that should have been part of my inheritance, was now tied up in monthly payments that would continue long after the twins graduated. By my senior year of high school, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Victoria had redecorated every room in beige and gold, claiming it was more sophisticated than Mom's warm blues and greens. She'd hired an interior designer who specialized in transitional spaces, apparently code for erasing all evidence that another woman had ever lived there. The designer, a rail-thin woman named Celeste, who spoke in hushed tones about energy flow and emotional cleansing, worked with Victoria to create what they called a forward-looking environment. "We're helping your father release attachment to the past," Celeste explained when I found them rearranging Mom's china cabinet. "These pieces will help him embrace the present moment." Mom's china cabinet, which had held 4 generations of family heirlooms, was replaced with a sleek, modern display case filled with Victoria's collection of crystal wine glasses and designer ceramics. The family heirlooms were stored in the basement temporarily, though Victoria made it clear she considered them outdated and impractical. The emotional manipulation reached its peak during my senior year. Victoria began a campaign to convince Dad that I was becoming rebellious and ungrateful, that I resented their happiness and was trying to sabotage their family unity. "She's at that age where girls test boundaries," Victoria would say when I questioned her decisions. "It's important that we present a united front or she'll try to manipulate us against each other." Victoria was an expert at timing her conversations with Dad. She'd wait until he was tired and stressed from work to suggest new rules that always benefited her children at my expense. She'd frame every restriction as being for my own good, every privilege granted to the twins as being necessary for their development. "College prep students need more sleep," she'd say about my 9 p.m. curfew, while Ethan and Zoe were allowed to stay out until dawn. "Too much social activity interferes with academic focus," she'd explain when she banned my friends from the house while hosting elaborate pool parties for the twins' social circle. The breaking point came during my high school graduation. Victoria had planned an elaborate celebration for Ethan and Zoe, who were graduating the same day from their private school. My graduation ceremony was at 2 p.m. Their party was scheduled to start at 3 p.m. at our house. "We can't reschedule," Victoria explained when I pointed out that this timing would make it impossible for our family to properly celebrate my graduation. "The caterers are already booked and we've sent invitations. You understand how these things work." I sat alone at my graduation ceremony, watching other families take photos and celebrate their children's achievements, while my father checked his watch anxiously, clearly eager to get home for Victoria's party. He left immediately after my name was called, missing the scholarship awards ceremony where I received 3 additional grants for academic excellence. When I arrived home with my cap and gown, the house was full of people I didn't recognize, celebrating Ethan's admission to USC and Zoe's acceptance to the Fashion Institute of Technology. My graduation cap and gown hung forgotten on a kitchen chair while Ethan held court in the living room, discussing his future fraternity plans and the convertible Victoria had promised to buy him for college. "There she is," Victoria announced when she spotted me, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted to publicly diminish me while appearing supportive. "Our little scholar, tell everyone about your community college plans." The laughter that followed felt like acid in my veins. I hadn't told anyone I was going to community college because I wasn't. I'd been accepted to Northwestern with a partial scholarship, but Victoria had been systematically undermining my plans by telling people I wasn't college material and that Dad couldn't afford to send me to a real university. That night, I overheard Victoria on the phone with her sister, discussing their long-term strategy with the kind of cold calculation that made my blood freeze. "Raymond's completely devoted now," she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose plan was working perfectly. "He barely remembers what his first wife was like. I've been very careful to help him process his grief and move forward." "What about his daughter?" her sister asked. "She'll age out soon enough," Victoria replied with casual dismissal. 18-year-olds move on. It's a natural progression. Once she's out of the house, she'll fade from his priorities. The twins will be his real children, the ones he's invested in emotionally and financially. I realized then that this had never been about love or marriage or blending families. Victoria was running a long con, systematically isolating Dad from his past and his daughter to secure her family's financial future. She wasn't just stealing his money, she was stealing his memory, his identity, and his relationship with me. The next morning, I confronted Dad directly about what I'd overheard. "Victoria is trying to replace me," I said, sitting across from him at the breakfast table while Victoria was at her yoga class. "She's erasing Mom's memory and pushing me out so her kids can inherit everything." Dad's face went cold in a way I'd never seen before. The man who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework for 12 years looked at me like I was a stranger making unreasonable demands. "Victoria has been nothing but kind to you," he said, his voice flat and distant. "She's trying to blend our families, and you're making it impossible with your jealousy and resentment." "Dad, please just listen to what I'm saying." "No, you listen," he said, standing up and pacing the kitchen. "Victoria and I are getting married next month. Her children will officially become my stepchildren, and I expect you to treat them with respect and gratitude. If you can't handle that, maybe it's time you found your own place." The wedding was small and elegant, held in our backyard among Mom's rose garden that Victoria had ripped out and replaced with minimalist landscaping. I wasn't asked to be in the wedding party. Instead, I served drinks to guests while Zoe played maid of honor and Ethan walked Victoria down the aisle in place of her absent father. During the ceremony, Victoria wore Mom's wedding veil, the one piece of her wedding outfit that had survived Victoria's perch. When I asked Dad about it later, he said Victoria had found it in the attic and thought it would be a nice way to honor my mother's memory. "She's including your mother in our new beginning," he said, completely missing the violation of seeing another woman wear my mother's most precious possession. After the ceremony, Victoria pulled me aside with the kind of fake sympathy she'd perfected over the past 3 years. "I know this is difficult," she said, adjusting the veil that had no right to be on her head. "But you're father and I want what's best for everyone. You're welcome here as long as you accept that things have changed permanently." What she meant was fall in line or get out. I chose community college over student loans I couldn't afford and moved into a tiny studio apartment near campus. Dad helped with the deposit, but made it clear this was his final contribution to my independence. "Victoria thinks it's important you learn self-reliance," he explained while handing me a check that covered exactly 1 month's rent. "She believes too much financial support creates dependency." For the next 2 years, I watched from the outside as Victoria completed her takeover of Dad's life. His construction business, which had been his pride and joy for 25 years, got restructured to include Victoria as co-owner and financial manager. The twins were added to all his bank accounts as beneficiaries. Even Dad's life insurance policy was updated to list Victoria as the primary beneficiary and the twins as secondary, with me removed entirely from the policy. I tried maintaining a relationship with Dad, calling weekly and visiting for holidays, but every conversation felt scripted and supervised. Victoria was always hovering, steering discussions away from the past and toward the twins' endless accomplishments. Ethan made Dean's list again, she'd announced during Sunday dinners, beaming with pride. "Zoe's internship at the fashion magazine is going wonderfully," she'd add. "They're considering offering her a full-time position after graduation." When I mentioned my own successes, making honor roll, getting promoted at my campus job, earning a scholarship for my final semester, the responses were polite but distant, like Dad was hearing about the achievements of a casual acquaintance rather than his daughter. "That's nice, dear," he'd say before launching into a detailed story about Ethan's fraternity leadership position or Zoe's latest photography project. I realized that Victoria had successfully rewritten Dad's definition of family. I was now the outsider, the reminder of his previous life that he'd moved beyond, while the twins had become his real children, the ones worthy of his attention, investment, and love. The real warning signs started during Dad's 62nd birthday party. Victoria had planned an elaborate celebration at the country club, complete with a slideshow of family memories projected on a large screen. I watched in horror as photo after photo flashed by. Every image was from the past 3 years. Not a single picture included my mother or showed Dad and me together from before Victoria's arrival. The slideshow told a story of a man who had been lost and alone until a beautiful woman and her children saved him, giving him a new purpose and a complete family. It was revisionist history at its most cruel and effective. When I mentioned this omission to Dad privately, he looked genuinely confused. "Victoria worked so hard on that presentation," he said, seeming almost offended that I'd criticized her effort. "She probably just focused on recent memories, the happy times we've shared as a family." But I noticed other changes too. Changes that went beyond emotional manipulation into something much more frightening. Dad seemed more forgetful than simple aging would explain, often losing track of conversations mid-sentence. He'd started napping more frequently and seemed unusually tired after meals, sometimes falling asleep in his chair during family dinners. When I expressed concern about these symptoms, Victoria quickly explained that he was just working too hard and experiencing the normal effects of getting older. "The business has been incredibly stressful," she said, her voice full of loving concern. "I keep telling him to slow down and delegate more, but you know how stubborn men can be about admitting they need help." Victoria had also taken over managing Dad's medications after he had what she described as a minor heart episode during a family vacation. She counted out his pills each morning with military precision, claiming the doctors had said he was getting confused about dosages and needed supervision. "It's just precautionary," she assured me when I visited and noticed the elaborate pill organizer system she'd implemented. The cardiologist wants someone monitoring his daily routine to make sure he doesn't accidentally double dose or skip medications. Dad, who had run a successful construction company for 25 years and managed complex projects involving millions of dollars and hundreds of workers with military precision, suddenly couldn't remember to take his heart medication properly. The contradiction was glaring, but every time I questioned it, Victoria had perfectly reasonable explanations backed up by medical documentation and concerned conversations with healthcare providers. "You're being paranoid," Dad would say when I suggested getting a second opinion or seeing his longtime physician. "Victoria is just looking out for me. She understands these medical things better than I do." The first real alarm bell rang on a Tuesday night when Dad called me at 3 a.m., his voice thick and disoriented in a way that made my stomach drop. "Where's your mother?" he asked, the confusion in his voice heartbreaking. "She was supposed to pick you up from school." "I've been waiting for hours." "Dad, Mom died 8 years ago," I said gently. "I'm 20 years old. I live in my own apartment." There was a long silence punctuated by the sound of Dad's labored breathing and what sounded like shuffling footsteps in the background. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Victoria said you were still in high school. She showed me your report card." Before I could respond, Victoria's voice came through the phone, crisp and authoritative. "Raymond, you're having another episode," she said. "Let me help you back to bed. You need your rest." The phone went dead, leaving me staring at my ceiling in the dark, my heart pounding with a terrible understanding of what was happening. When I called back the next morning, Victoria answered with her usual bright tone, explaining that Dad had been experiencing some confusion due to his new medication regimen. "The cardiologist had to adjust his prescriptions after his latest tests," she said, her voice full of medical authority. "Disorientation and memory issues are common side effects while his body adjusts to the new combinations." But when I researched Dad's supposed medications online, the combinations Victoria described didn't match any standard cardiac treatment protocols I could find. Some of the drugs she mentioned weren't even heart medications. They were sedatives and anti-anxiety medications that, when used together in high doses, could cause severe memory problems, confusion, and cognitive decline. I started keeping a detailed journal of Dad's behavior during my visits, documenting the times he seemed sharp and alert versus when he appeared foggy and disoriented. A clear pattern emerged. Dad was most confused in the evenings after dinner and most lucid in the early mornings before Victoria gave him his daily medications. During one visit, I arrived early in the morning before Victoria's usual medication routine. Dad was in the garden pruning roses with steady hands and clear focus. When he saw me, his face lit up with genuine recognition and warmth. "There's my girl," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt like the father I remembered. "How's school going? Are you still planning to transfer to Northwestern?" For 20 minutes, we had a completely normal conversation. Dad asked about my classes, my job, my plans for the future. He seemed sharp, engaged, and completely himself. But then, Victoria appeared with his morning pills and a glass of orange juice. "Time for your medication, honey," she said sweetly, watching carefully as Dad swallowed each pill. Within 30 minutes, the man I'd been talking to was gone, replaced by someone who seemed confused about who I was and why I was visiting. When I tried to discuss this pattern with Dad during one of his more lucid moments, he gripped my hand with surprising strength and glanced nervously toward the kitchen where Victoria was preparing his evening medications. "Something's wrong," he whispered, his voice filled with a desperation that broke my heart. "I can't think clearly anymore. Everything feels fuzzy, like I'm living underwater. Dad, maybe we should talk to a different doctor. Get a second opinion." "She won't let me," he said quickly, his eyes darting toward the sound of Victoria's footsteps. "Victoria handles all my appointments now. She says I get too confused and give doctors wrong information about my symptoms." Before I could respond, Victoria returned with a glass of water and Dad's evening medications, her smile bright and loving. "Time for your pills, honey," she said, counting each one carefully into his palm and watching to make sure he swallowed them all. Dad was struggling to follow our conversation and seemed ready for bed despite it being only 7 p.m. on a Saturday evening. That night, I called Dad's longtime physician, Dr. Morrison, who had been treating our family for over 15 years and had delivered me when I was born. "I'm concerned about my father's medication regimen," I said. "He seems confused and disoriented, especially in the evenings, and the symptoms seem to be getting worse." Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a gravity that made my hands shake. "I haven't seen your father in over 8 months, he said finally. His wife transferred his care to a new practice last year. She said he wanted someone closer to home who specialized in geriatric medicine." "What new practice? Who's his doctor now?" "I'm not sure," Dr. Morrison admitted. She didn't provide forwarding information, which was unusual. When I tried to send his medical records, the address she gave turned out to be incorrect. I spent the next week researching every cardiologist, geriatrician, and family practice in a 50-mile radius, calling each office to see if Dad was a patient. Nobody had him on file. Either Victoria was lying about his medical care completely, or she'd found a doctor willing to prescribe medications without proper oversight, which would be illegal and dangerous. The truth, I would soon learn, was worse than I could have imagined. I hired a private investigator named Derek Chin, a former police detective who specialized in elder abuse cases. What he discovered about Victoria's background made my blood run cold. Victoria hadn't just been married once before meeting Dad. She'd been married 4 times. 2 of her previous husbands had died under suspicious circumstances involving medication interactions and sudden health declines. One husband's family had filed a police report claiming Victoria had systematically poisoned him, but the case was dropped due to insufficient evidence and Victoria's convincing portrayal of herself as a grieving widow. The investigator also discovered that Victoria wasn't just managing Dad's medications. She was ordering them online from questionable pharmacies in other countries using forged prescriptions and adjusting dosages without any medical supervision. The combinations she was giving Dad were not only inappropriate for his actual health conditions, they were potentially lethal if continued long-term. Even more damning, Derek found evidence that Victoria had been systematically stealing from Dad's business accounts, using her position as co-owner to redirect funds into accounts she controlled. She'd convinced Dad to sign financial documents by telling him they were routine business paperwork, but they were actually changing ownership structures and beneficiary designations. Armed with this information, I drove to Dad's house early one morning when Victoria was at her weekly yoga class. I found Dad in his workshop, looking more alert than I'd seen him in months. "Dad, I need you to listen very carefully," I said, showing him Derek's report. "Victoria has been poisoning you." I expected shock, denial, even anger. What I didn't expect was the look of relief that crossed Dad's face. "I know," he said quietly. I stared at him in disbelief. "You know? Not poisoning exactly, but something," he said, his voice growing stronger and more focused than I'd heard in years. "The pills make me tired and confused, but I'm not stupid. I've been pretending to take them and hiding them instead." He led me to a small box hidden behind his workbench, filled with hundreds of pills in various colors and sizes. "I started getting suspicious when I couldn't remember conversations from the day before," he continued. "So I began palming the pills during dinner and storing them here. I wanted to see if my symptoms improved when I stopped taking them." "Dad, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you call the police?" Dad's expression hardened with a determination I hadn't seen since before Victoria entered our lives. "Because I needed to understand what she was planning," he said, "and I needed evidence that would stick. Victoria's smart. She's done this before. I couldn't just accuse her of drugging me without proof that would hold up in court." He pulled out a larger box from under his workbench. Inside were notebooks filled with dates, times, and detailed observations about Victoria's behavior. Printed emails between Victoria and someone claiming to be Dr. Kowalski about adjusting Dad's treatment plan. Photos of Victoria crushing extra pills into Dad's food. Even receipts for medications ordered online without prescriptions. "I installed hidden cameras in the house 4 months ago," Dad said. "Everything's being recorded. Her preparing my food, counting out pills, researching medication interactions online." "But Dad, why are you still living with her? Why haven't you called the police already?" Dad's expression turned cold and calculating. "Because I want her to think she's winning right up until the moment she loses everything." Over the next 2 hours, Dad explained his plan with the methodical precision of the successful businessman he'd always been. He'd been working with his longtime lawyer, Mr. Patterson, to build an airtight case against Victoria while appearing to be under her complete control. He'd secretly updated his will, gathered evidence of her crimes, and arranged for everything to be revealed immediately after his death. "But Dad, what if she actually kills you? What if you miscalculate and she gives you too much of something?" "She won't," he said with absolute certainty. Murder investigations involve autopsies and scrutiny. She's too smart for that. She's planning a longer game, keep me medicated and compliant until I'm completely dependent on her, then gradually increase dosages until my heart gives out from what appears to be natural causes. She figures she has another year or two to make it look completely natural. How can you be sure about her timeline? Dad showed me intercepted emails between Victoria and her sister, printed from her personal account that he gained access to by installing monitoring software on their shared computer. She wants to make sure the twins are established as my legal heirs first, he said, pointing to specific conversations. I'm supposed to adopt them officially, update all my insurance policies, and then die of apparent heart failure just after she's secured as the primary beneficiary of everything. The plan was diabolical in its patience and precision. Victoria wasn't just planning to kill Dad, she was methodically setting up a scenario where his death would appear natural, inevitable, and completely unrelated to her actions. So, what's your plan? I asked. I'm going to give her exactly what she thinks she wants, Dad said with a grim smile, and then I'm going to take it all away. Dad's counter-strategy was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its completeness. He would continue pretending to be under Victoria's influence while secretly documenting everything she did. When his apparent health declined enough to require hospitalization, which Victoria was actively working toward, he would make sure all the evidence was ready for immediate release. She thinks she's slowly killing me, Dad explained. But really, I'm building the case that's going to destroy her completely. The next few months were agonizing for me. I had to watch Victoria continue her charade of loving care, knowing exactly what she was doing. Dad continued to appear confused and dependent, but our secret communications kept me informed of his real condition and the evidence he was gathering. He'd figured out how to fake taking his medications while secretly filming Victoria's attempts to increase his dosages. He discovered that she was also putting additional drugs in his food, sedatives that would make him more compliant and eventually lead to heart failure when combined with the medications she was supposedly giving him. The most damning evidence came when Dad installed a hidden camera in Victoria's home office. We watched her research his life insurance policies, calculate inheritance timelines, and even practice her grieving widow routine in the mirror. In one particularly chilling recording, she was on the phone with someone discussing the best way to increase Dad's medication without raising medical suspicion. The heart condition gives us perfect cover, she said, checking notes she'd made about drug interactions. A little extra stress, some medication conflicts, and it'll look completely natural. No one questions a heart attack in a man his age. Dad also discovered that Victoria had been forging his signature on financial documents for over a year, gradually transferring assets into accounts she controlled. She'd convinced him to sign papers by telling him they were routine business documents or insurance updates, but they were actually changing beneficiaries and ownership structures throughout his entire financial portfolio. She's been planning this for over 3 years, Dad told me during one of our secret meetings at a coffee shop across town. Every document, every conversation, every medication, it's all been building toward the moment when I die, and she inherits everything. The final piece of evidence came when Dad hired a forensic accountant to trace all the financial transfers Victoria had orchestrated. The theft was systematic and extensive. She'd stolen over $400,000 from his business accounts and redirected his investment income into funds she managed. As Dad's apparent health declined, Victoria's behavior became more brazen and confident. She started making concrete plans for after his death, including renovations to the house, arrangements for the twins' ongoing education expenses, and even discussions with a travel agent about the European vacation she planned to take when she was a wealthy widow. Poor Raymond is struggling so much, she'd tell friends and neighbors. The doctor says his heart is failing faster than we hoped. It's just a matter of time now. What she didn't know was that Dad had been secretly recording these conversations and sharing them with his lawyer and the private investigator. The day Dad was hospitalized with severe chest pains, which Victoria had induced by significantly increasing his medication dosage and adding a dangerous drug interaction, everything was already in motion. Mr. Patterson had copies of all evidence. Law enforcement had been briefed, and a completely revised will had been filed that excluded Victoria and her children entirely. Dad died 3 days later, apparently from heart failure brought on by medication complications. Victoria's performance at the hospital was worthy of an Academy Award, the devastated wife who'd done everything possible to save her beloved husband. But Dad had planned for this, too. Hidden cameras in his hospital room captured Victoria's moments of unguarded satisfaction when she thought no one was watching. In one particularly revealing moment, she was caught smiling while texting someone about finally being free to live the life she deserved. At the funeral, Victoria orchestrated every detail to present herself as the grieving widow and devoted stepmother. She wore designer black that she'd purchased weeks earlier, as if she'd been preparing for this moment. Her tears seemed genuine to most observers, but I noticed how she checked her phone constantly, and how her grief seemed to lift whenever she thought no one was looking. Ethan and Zoe flanked her like bodyguards, already discussing their inheritance and making plans for their share of Dad's estate. They'd been told by Victoria that Dad had left everything to their family, with only a small keepsake set aside for his biological daughter. "I can't believe he's gone," Victoria sobbed to the assembled guests, her voice carrying just the right amount of heartbreak. "But I know Raymond would want us to carry on his legacy and honor everything he worked so hard to build." During the service, Victoria delivered a heartfelt eulogy about Dad's generosity and love for family, describing how he'd embraced her children as his own and how excited he'd been about their future together. "Raymond always said that family isn't just about blood," she said, looking directly at me with what appeared to be compassion, but felt like victory. "It's about the people who choose to love and support each other through everything life brings." The implication was clear. I had failed to be that kind of family member, while Victoria and her children had earned their place as Dad's true family. I sat in the back row during the service, watching this performance with a mixture of grief for my father and anticipation for what was coming next. Nobody had saved me a seat with the family, but that was perfectly fine. I had a better view of everyone's faces from back there. After the burial, everyone gathered at Dad's house, which Victoria had already begun referring to as her house. She'd started rearranging furniture that morning, moving Dad's favorite reading chair to make room for a bar setup where guests could gather and share memories. "The will reading is just a formality," I heard her whisper to her sister while they arranged flowers. "Raymond left everything to me and the kids. The poor thing will probably get some small keepsake to remember him by." Victoria was already making concrete plans for her new life. She'd secretly hired an interior designer to completely renovate the house, including turning Dad's workshop into a yoga studio and converting the garage into a guest suite for when her mother visited. She'd also been in contact with a realtor about the possibility of selling the house and moving somewhere more luxurious. Zoe was discussing her room renovation plans with the designer Victoria had brought to the reception, talking about converting Dad's office into her personal study space. Ethan was researching which of Dad's classic cars he wanted to sell first to fund his spring break trip to Europe and a new apartment near his university. Victoria spent most of the reception on the phone with her financial advisor, discussing how quickly she could access Dad's accounts and whether she needed to maintain his construction business or could liquidate it immediately for maximum profit. "The construction company will be worth more if we sell the assets separately," she said, not bothering to lower her voice since she assumed everyone supported her plans. "The equipment alone should bring in a substantial amount." That's when Mr. Patterson arrived with his briefcase and a solemn expression that immediately caught Victoria's attention. He looked like he was carrying bad news, which made Victoria's confident smile falter for just a moment before she recovered her composure. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said, setting up his materials at the dining room table with the gravity of someone about to deliver life-changing information. "Raymond asked me to read his will immediately after the service." Victoria smoothed her expensive black dress and took her position at the head of the table, the spot she'd been planning to claim as the new matriarch of the family. Ethan and Zoe flanked her like loyal lieutenants, barely containing their excitement about learning the details of their inheritance. I remained standing by the kitchen doorway, exactly where Dad had instructed me to position myself months earlier. "Should we wait for other family members?" Mr. Patterson asked politely, glancing around the room. "This is the family," Victoria said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who believed she was about to inherit everything. "Raymond's daughter chose not to be part of our lives. She's here out of obligation, not love." I said nothing, just as Dad had instructed me to do. My time to speak would come soon enough. "Very well," Mr. Patterson said, opening his briefcase with deliberate precision. "The last will and testament of Raymond Blackwood. Dated 6 months ago and witnessed by 3 independent parties." Victoria's smile grew wider with anticipation. She'd been waiting for this moment for over 3 years. "To my wife, Victoria, I leave my gratitude for showing me who she really was." Her smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. This was probably just Dad's dramatic way of expressing his love before getting to the substantial bequests. "To her children, Ethan and Zoe, I leave the same. My gratitude for revealing their true character and intentions." Now Ethan looked confused, glancing at his mother for reassurance that this was normal legal language that would make sense soon. "To my daughter, who remained loyal even when I appeared to abandon her, I leave everything. The house, all bank accounts, all investments, the construction business, and all personal property." Victoria shot up from her chair like she'd been electrocuted, her face transforming from confident satisfaction to pure shock in an instant. That's impossible, she said, her voice shaking with disbelief and rage. We discussed this extensively. Raymond promised me everything would be left to our family. Mr. Patterson held up his hand with calm authority. There's more, Mrs. Blackwood. To the appropriate authorities, I leave comprehensive evidence of fraud, elder abuse, systematic medication tampering, and attempted murder. This evidence has been compiled over the past 6 months and includes video recordings, financial records, medical documentation, and detailed witness statements. The room went completely silent except for the sound of Victoria's increasingly labored breathing and Zoe's sharp gasp of shock. Additionally, Mr. Patterson continued, with the methodical precision of someone who'd prepared for this moment, Raymond specifically requested that this evidence be presented to law enforcement immediately following the reading of his will. Victoria's face had gone completely white, then flushed red with rage and panic. This is absolutely ridiculous, she stammered, looking around the room for support. Raymond was confused and paranoid at the end. The medications made him suspicious of everyone who tried to help him. He didn't know what he was saying. On the contrary, Mr. Patterson said, pulling out a thick folder filled with documentation. Raymond had 3 separate psychological evaluations over the past 6 months, all conducted by independent professionals and all confirming his complete mental competency. He also had independent medical evaluations confirming that the medications he was supposedly prescribed would have been fatal in the combinations and dosages you were administering. Victoria's carefully constructed mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation underneath. You can't prove anything, she hissed, no longer bothering to maintain her grieving widow act. Mr. Patterson pulled out a tablet computer and pressed play. Victoria's face appeared on the screen, clearly visible as she crushed additional pills into Dad's evening soup while he napped in his recliner. You poisoned him, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since the reading began. The room erupted into chaos. Ethan and Zoe started shouting questions at their mother. Victoria's sister began crying and demanding explanations. The remaining funeral guests stood in stunned silence, processing the revelation that they'd been attending the funeral of a murder victim. The next video shows Mrs. Blackwood researching lethal drug combinations on her computer. Mr. Patterson continued with professional calm. And here she is practicing her widow performance in the mirror, including the specific phrases she planned to use when discussing Raymond's death. Victoria lunged for the tablet, but Mr. Patterson was expecting the reaction and smoothly moved it out of her reach. These are copies, he said. The original evidence is already with the district attorney's office. I want a lawyer, Victoria said, her voice now completely cold and calculating, all pretense of grief abandoned. That's certainly your right, said Detective Martinez, who had just walked through the front door with 2 uniformed officers. Victoria Mills, you're under arrest for elder abuse, financial fraud, and attempted murder. As they read her rights, Victoria turned on me with pure, undiluted hatred. This should have been mine, she screamed as they handcuffed her, her voice carrying years of resentment and entitlement. He was nothing before I came along. Nothing. A broken man grieving his dead wife. I gave him purpose. I gave him a family. I gave him a reason to live. And you? You're just a jealous little who couldn't stand that he loved me more than you. No, I said calmly, meeting her furious gaze without flinching. He never loved you at all. He was just gathering evidence to destroy you. The officers had to physically drag her out as she continued screaming about how the evidence was fabricated and how I'd manipulated a sick old man against his loving wife. Ethan and Zoe sat in stunned silence as Detective Martinez explained that they might face charges for benefiting from their mother's crimes, depending on what they knew and when they learned it. We really didn't know, Zoe whispered, tears streaming down her face. We thought she just helped him organize his pills and manage his schedule. And the money she was spending on your education and expenses? Detective Martinez asked. She told us Dad wanted to help with our future, Ethan said, his voice barely audible. She said he loved us like his own children and wanted to make sure we had every opportunity. The detective nodded. We'll need formal statements from both of you. Depending on what our investigation reveals about your knowledge and involvement, you may or may not face charges. After the police left with Victoria, the remaining guests slowly departed, leaving me alone with Ethan and Zoe. They looked young and lost, nothing like the confident teenagers who'd been planning their inheritance just hours earlier. The house is mine now, I said, not unkindly, but firmly. You have until the end of the month to figure out where you're going. We understand, Ethan said quietly. And we're sorry about everything. We never meant for anyone to get hurt. Your mother systematically poisoned my father for 3 years, I replied. Whether you meant for it to happen doesn't change what did happen. That night, I sat in Dad's workshop with his hidden notebook, reading the final entries he'd made before entering the hospital for the last time. On the last page, He'd written a letter to me in his careful handwriting. Asterisk, if you're reading this, then justice worked exactly the way it was supposed to. I know I wasn't the father you deserved these past few years. I had to let Victoria think she was winning so I could gather enough evidence to destroy her completely. I know it looked like I'd forgotten about you, like I'd chosen her family over my own daughter. But everything I did was to protect what matters most, you and the truth about what kind of person your mother really was. Victoria tried to erase your mom from our lives, but love isn't that easy to kill. Your mother's strength lives in you, and that's what made it possible for me to be strong enough to fight back. The house is yours. The business is yours, but more importantly, you have your freedom and your future back. Use them well. I'm proud of the woman you've become, even when I couldn't show it. Love always, Dad. Asterisk, I cried for the first time since he died, finally understanding that he'd never abandoned me at all. Every cold interaction, every moment when he seemed to choose Victoria's family over mine, had been part of a larger plan to protect me and expose her. The trial took 10 months and became a sensation in our community. Victoria was convicted on all charges after the overwhelming evidence was presented to the jury. The prosecution called it one of the most calculated and cold-blooded cases of elder abuse they'd ever seen. The defendant systematically isolated, poisoned, and robbed a man who trusted her completely, the judge said during sentencing. The premeditation and cruelty involved, combined with evidence of similar behavior in previous relationships, warrant the maximum penalty available under law. Victoria was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no remorse throughout the trial, maintaining her innocence and insisting that she'd been trying to help Dad manage his medical conditions. Ethan and Zoe were not charged after cooperating fully with the investigation and testifying about their mother's manipulation. They both described how Victoria had controlled their access to Dad and fed them false information about his wishes and feelings. We thought he really wanted to adopt us, Zoe testified, tears streaming down her face. Mom said he was just waiting for the right legal moment to make it official. The twins moved in with their aunt in another state after the trial. They both reached out to apologize once they fully understood the extent of what Victoria had done. We know it doesn't change anything, Ethan wrote in a letter 6 months after the trial. But we want you to know that we never knew about the poisoning or the financial theft. If we had known, we would have called the police immediately. I kept Dad's house, but sold the construction business to his longtime foreman, who'd always been loyal to our family and understood Dad's vision for the company. With the money from the sale, I finished my degree at Northwestern, the school Mom and I had always dreamed about, and started a nonprofit organization focused on identifying and preventing elder abuse. Our first case involved an 80-year-old man whose live-in caregiver was systematically stealing his Social Security payments and selling his medications. Our second case exposed a nursing home that was over-medicating residents to keep them compliant and manageable. By the end of our first year, we'd helped prosecute 12 cases of elder abuse and recovered over $500,000 in stolen assets for victims and their families. Dad would have been proud of what grew out of his sacrifice and planning. On the first anniversary of Dad's death, I visited his grave and told him about the lives we'd saved. I brought photos of the families we'd helped and read him thank you letters from people who'd escaped situations similar to what he'd endured. We saved Mrs. Chin from a daughter-in-law who was forging her Social Security checks and isolating her from other family members, I told his headstone. And Mr. Rodriguez's nephew was stealing his prescription medications to sell on the street while giving him sugar pills instead. The evidence-gathering techniques you taught me helped convict them both. Sometimes people ask if I feel guilty about the elaborate trap Dad set for Victoria, or whether I think his methods were extreme. The answer is simple. I don't feel guilty about anything. Dad chose to sacrifice 3 years of his life and risk his health to gather irrefutable evidence against a woman who would have killed him and stolen everything he'd worked for. Victoria still writes me letters from prison, claiming she was framed and that Dad was mentally ill. She insists that she loved him genuinely and was only trying to help manage his medical care according to doctor's orders. I don't read her letters anymore. The last communication I received from her was through her lawyer, offering to provide information about her previous husband's deaths in exchange for a reduced sentence. The FBI is investigating those cases now, and preliminary evidence suggests that at least 2 other men died under suspicious circumstances while married to Victoria. I've learned that some people are poison in human form, and the only way to protect yourself and others is to document everything meticulously and trust the justice system to work the way it's supposed to when given sufficient evidence. The house feels peaceful now. I've restored it to the way it looked when Mom was alive, with her favorite colors and the family photos Victoria tried to erase. Dad's workshop has become a memorial space where I keep his evidence notebooks and the awards our nonprofit has received for helping elder abuse victims. On quiet evenings, I sit in Mom's reading chair and imagine her and Dad together, finally at peace, knowing that truth and love won in the end against calculation and greed. And sometimes, when I'm working on a difficult case involving elder abuse, I can almost hear Dad's voice guiding me through the process of gathering evidence and building an unbreakable case for justice. Victoria thought she could erase our family history and rewrite our story with herself as the hero. Instead, she revealed her true nature and gave Dad exactly the evidence he needed to make sure she could never hurt anyone else again. The best revenge isn't just letting the truth speak for itself. It's making sure that truth protects other people from experiencing the same kind of calculated evil.